Hello everyone, welcome to your review on how to study for the RC310 course. So this video is going to provide us with some information on what actually is the RC310 as well as the different types of texts that the questions are going to be based on. We'll also take a look at how to actually apply different skills used for various types of questions through the sample questions provided, which will hopefully familiarize ourselves with the format used for this course. So without further ado, let's take a look at the content in this video. This video is basically one out of 3 parts, where this first part is going to cover what is actually the format of the RC310, and we'll also take a look at 2 question styles. So that's going to be the fill in the blanks questions as well as some short passage questions. So let's take a look at what is actually the RC310. The RC310 is an online test that you can access through the Cyberschool website for Pre-Uni New College. And you'll see that there's actually 10 of these tests, and each of them has 31 questions each. And each test is going to have 5 different parts, and we can see those on the screen here. There'll be a few inference questions, a couple of short passage questions, some true and false questions, a bunch of gapped text questions, and finally some general reading comprehension questions to finish you off. Now, these questions might actually have different approaches that you need to do because they're different types, and we'll be taking a look at what skills you need for these types of questions throughout this video as well. So since we're only going to be looking at inference and short passage question types in this video, make sure that you do tune in to part 2 and 3 to look at the other remaining question types. Okay, so let's take a look at the very first question type, which is our fill-in-the-blanks inference questions. So what we're going to be seeing for these questions is we're going to be reading a very light and short, mostly factual paragraph. So it's not really going to be long. It's going to be 2 to 3 sentences at best. Now, the fun thing about these paragraphs is that it's going to have one random word missing from the paragraph. And it's our job to figure out what word is going to best fit into that gap to make sure that the passage makes sense when you put that word into that gap. So to do these questions, we're going to be basically following 3 main steps whenever we approach these questions. And they're going to involve actually reading the paragraph carefully to understand what the general topic is, and that will hopefully point you towards which answer option is going to make the most sense. Then the other 2 tips are basically to look very closely at the words used just before and after the blank, because those provide the most contextual clues on what word you might need to put in there to be the most correct. Now, these questions can get a bit difficult when synonyms are involved, so it's really important to understand the contextual clues that you can get from the question, because that's how you're going to be figuring out which answer option is best fitting for that particular style of context. So, without further ado, let's take a look at a quick sample question. Okay, so what we see here on the screen is a sample question for this style of question. This question says, spices used to flavor food are often effective antibacterial agents. Onion, garlic, horseradish, black pepper, mustard, curry, rosemary, and sage are potential germ killers. Just a sprinkling of rosemary and sage on meat will blank the growth of bacteria. Sage has the additional ability to slow down oxidation, which causes food to go rancid. Right, so now that we've read the question, let's apply the 3 steps that we talked about on how to solve these questions. So step number 1, if you'll recall, was to identify what it's actually about. So now that we've read the question, we can tell that this question's about the relationship between some spices and bacteria. And from the word antibacterial, we can basically tell that these spices are bad for the growth of bacteria. So that's going to be our step number 1. Now, the next step was to look just before and after where the blank is. And looking at the question, the blank is right here. So we need to read what is just before. And it says, just a sprinkling of rosemary and sage will blank something. So we are told in step number 2 that rosemary and sage will do something to the meat. And then right after the blank is where it says the growth of bacteria. So we can tell in step number 3 that the growth of bacteria will be affected. So from what we've learned from the question, we can tell that rosemary and sage is probably going to do its antibacterial properties on the meat, which causes the growth of bacteria to be affected. And we can tell it's actually going to be stopped or reduced in some way due to the antibacterial nature. We're also told the hint that these are potential germ killers, which we know that bacteria are considered to be germs. So looking at the answer options, we want an answer option that means to slow down the growth of bacteria or hamper it in some way. So looking at the answer options, the only word that does this is answer option B, the word retard, which means to slow down drastically. So that's going to be the only correct answer option for this question. Now let's take a look at one more question of this same style. So for this question, we read a passage that says, one of the winter attractions in Holland is that of the ice mariners. These mariners will wear ice skates and speed along on the ice, holding large sails in front of them. There is even an 11-city race that covers 150 miles. The race's best time was set in 1942 when the winner finished the blank in 9 hours. Alrighty, so once again, we're going to be applying our 3 major steps to tackle this question. So remember, step number 1 was figuring out what this passage is about, and that's fairly straightforward. We've learnt something about these ice mariners who are basically ice skaters who run around in Holland. So that's going to be our step number 1. The topic's about ice mariners who are ice skaters in Holland. Now, for step number 2 and 3, we're going to be looking at just before and after what the blank was. So we are told about how the race's best time was set in 1942 when the winner finished the blank in 9 hours. So before the blank, we are told that the blank is going to be something about the winner and their best time. And the word after the blank tells us something about how long this race time was. Okay, so based on these contextual clues, we can basically figure out that the winner finished the race in 9 hours, and the blank is going to have to need a definition of that sort. So looking at the answer options, we can immediately cancel out A and D because they don't relate at all to this question. But it becomes really tricky when we take a look at answer options B and C, course and track, because they're essentially synonyms. So how do we figure out which one is the correct answer? Now, the thing with synonyms is that no words really are exactly the same because they'll have at least some sort of connotation that sets them apart from different similar words. So when it comes to the word course, it basically means to be a pathway, just like the word track. But the word course has connotations to do with multiple elements. So think about where you see the word course. And for example, an obstacle course has a bunch of different things you need to do to go through the race and finish it. Another example might be your pre-uni course, which could be a combination of WEMG, which involves you doing writing, English, maths, and GA. So there's multiple elements for you need to do to finish the thing. And that's what the connotation of course is. Now compare that to the word track. And a track is also a pathway usually used for walking, but it's got connotations of being made from marks who others have passed by, and so typically refers to shorter pathways. And if we take a look at the question, it actually says that the the race that the winner finished in 9 hours actually took 11 cities to complete and 150 miles. Now, even if we use kilometers and have no idea what a mile is, you can tell that a 11 city distance race is going to be huge and probably isn't just limited to just one road, but has multiple roads and therefore multiple elements. So the word that better fits this connotation of the question is actually going to be option B, course, rather than option C, track. Okay, so now that we're basically experts on inference fill-in-the-blank style questions, the next type of question we're going to be looking at is short passage questions. So for these questions, the question that you're going to be reading is going to be a tad bit longer than the fill-in-the-blanks questions, and the reason is because these paragraphs are usually a bit more in-depth on a specific given topic. Now, the purpose of these questions is to read the paragraph and then conclude what the author is attempting to say. So what this means is that these questions aren't just going to be read the question and then select the provided information. It's actually going to involve us reading between the lines to say what the author hasn't actually explicitly stated in the text. So the way that you're going to approach these questions is you're going to understand the information that's been provided to you in the question, then try to figure out what it's trying to tell us with the provided information. Then we're going to be only using the information provided in the question to figure out a logical conclusion that can be made from all the clues provided in the question. So these questions can be a little bit difficult to begin with because you have to basically figure out what isn't said in the paragraph, but with enough practice we should be able to be quite confident in approaching these questions. So let's take a look at a sample question to do exactly that. Okay, so here's our sample question for short passages, and we can see that this passage says, reptiles' feet are varied. Desert lizards have scales on their toes to give them better grip in sand. Tree-climbing lizards have sharp claws. Reptiles that spend time in water have webbed, flipper-like feet. Some also have tails that propel them through the water. Some geckos have pads on the soles of their fingers and toes. These allow the animal to cling to any surface even while walking upward or hanging upside down. Okay, so remember what step 1 is, and step 1 was basically to collect the information from the paragraph. So what we learned from this paragraph is the fact that lizards' feet can vary very differently. We are told that desert lizards have scales, tree-climbing lizards have sharp claws, reptiles that are in the water have webbed feet, and some even have tails that propel them through the water. Geckos have pads on their soles, and these allow them to walk upside down or hang upside down. So what we gain from these is basically that these reptiles have features that allow them to survive best in their own environments. Then for step 2, it was to figure out what the question isn't actually telling us, or what the author is trying to say based on what is being provided in the question. We're told that reptiles' feet basically have features that allow them to survive better in their own environments, which is why there are so many different ways that a reptile's foot can look. Then step 3 was to actually make the conclusion that you obtain from reading the information in step 1 and step 2. So for that, let's take a look at the answer options, because these are going to be the conclusions that we can make, and we're basically going to see if they make sense. Option A says most reptiles have webbed feet, and from what we know that different reptiles have different features, so this isn't going to be correct when it says most of them do. The second answer option says that geckos are a type of reptile. Now, when we look at the question specifically mentions geckos in this part of the question when it says it provides the gecko as an example of a reptile with different features on its feet. So we can, even though it doesn't directly tell us that a gecko is a lizard, since it's been included in the list of different reptile features, we can make the assumption the logical assumption that a gecko is a reptile. So this answer option actually makes sense. Option C says reptiles are best at running up walls and cliffs, and even though we do know that they can climb up walls and cliffs, we don't know if they are necessarily the best, so we can't conclude this information. And finally, reptiles' legs and feet are poorly adapted would be the opposite conclusion that you can make after reading this text. So the only answer option that made sense that we can logically make from the information provided in the question is option B, that geckos are a type of reptile. Okay, so just to consolidate our knowledge, let's take a look at one more sample question for short passages. So this question says, during the reign of Emperor Tiberius, Roman citizens took pride in teaching animals to do many kinds of tricks. The drum and flute were used to charm snakes, calm wild bulls, and tame ferocious lions and tigers. Under the influence of song, certain wild bulls allowed little children to dance upon their backs. One lion permitted a man to put his head in its mouth, and a tiger accepted a kiss on the cheek. The greatest triumph occurred when a trained raven flew past the emperor and squawked, "Hail Caesar." So what can we tell from this paragraph? Again, let's use our approach to short passage questions. The first thing to do would be to gain the information provided in the question. So in the passage, we are told that during the Roman period, the citizens made animals do a bunch of tricks, and these involved a bunch of different instruments to produce some sounds that could change the behavior of animals. And we're told that it was under the influence of song that these acts occurred. So that's going to be the biggest takeaway from this question. Then for step 2, we're basically going to be looking for the overarching idea. Based on what we read, we can tell that some animals can change their normal behaviors depending on what music they listen to. Then step 3 is to make a logical conclusion based on what we've learned from step 1 and 2. Okay, so let's take a look at the answer options. Option A says music makes some wild animals trainable. So when we had a look at the animals examples in the question, we saw really dangerous animals as examples. We're told snakes, wild bulls, lions, and tigers, all of which can definitely kill a person if they wanted to, doing really tame things like letting children dance on them, put their head in the mouth, and even accepting a kiss on the cheek. So that is definitely considered trainable, and these were all wild animals. So this is definitely a conclusion that we can make from the information provided. Option B said a person actually spoke for the raven's voice, and there's just no evidence for that in the question, so we can ignore that answer option. Option C said Tiberius kept snakes, bulls, and ravens as pets. But in the question, we're actually told that the animals were wild, so it doesn't make any sense that they were pets. So again, option C is probably not going to be the answer, and option D says any animal can be trained to do anything. And even though we're given a wide variety of animals in this passage, we don't know if that's true for every single animal on planet Earth, and there are quite a lot of animals, so they probably aren't going to be the exact same behaviors to music, and we don't know that from the question since we're only given 5 different examples in the question. So the only logical conclusion that we could make was actually answer option A, that some wild animals are trainable when they listen to music. So that brings us to the end of part 1 of this video. Hopefully you've learned something about how these questions will be styled and formatted, and you also learned about how we're going to be approaching the first sections of the RC 310 course. So thank you everyone so much for listening, and I'll hopefully see you very soon in parts 2 and 3.